Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2. I'm incredibly excited to show you guys the fully optimized absolute blaster rogue shadow build. If you're looking to just quickly level up or literally just do content insanely efficiently and quickly and just blow up the entire map, this is the build that you're going to want to use. It is an unbelievable amount of fun, and with the recent nerfs of twisting blades, I ended up compensating for a lot of that with things that we changed in the build, and this build escaped that nerf fantastically. It's not going to feel as good as it used to, of course, but it is still insanely powerful, and it is probably my favorite rogue build by far. As you can see in the gameplay, it absolutely blasts. The only way that this build really falls off is if you're doing content that is insanely higher level than you, like doing tier 70 plus nightmare dungeons or fighting enemies that are literally like 30 levels higher than you. At that point, you need to go a little bit more defensive. This build is mainly focused on just very efficiently and quickly just farming through things, but it's also a fantastic build for leveling up if you're getting from 50 to 100. This is pretty much what I use the entire time, and it is unbelievably powerful. Every 1,000 likes that this video ends up getting, I will be giving away a Diablo 4 battle pass when the season goes live. So if you want a chance to win, make sure to just subscribe, like the video, and comment down below. If you have any questions, feel free to swing by when I'm streaming on Twitch. I've been streaming a 10 lately and would love to see more of you guys around. And I'd love to hit 200k subs soon, so subscribe if you haven't already. I'm going to be making a ton more rogue builds. If you guys want a build that is focused on Shadow Clone and not Death Trap, leave it down in the comments. If you want a build that is focused on Flurry, leave it down in the comments. And if you want a penetrating shot build, also leave that down in the comments. And whichever one gets the most comments is the build that I will make a video on. I'll have full gameplay of a Nightmare Dungeon at the end of the video, and I'll also talk about how you will want to optimally play the build. Also, just like all of my other builds, I'm going to be posting this on my website, so if you want to be able to quickly reference the skills, skill points, legendaries, etc., make sure to check out the website. Anyways, getting into the skills, we're going to be using Puncture as our basic skill. This is mainly just for applying vulnerable on single target fights. Then we have Twisting Blades here, because this is a Twisting Blades build, and Twisting Blades is insane. When it comes to our mobility, the whole point of this build is to very quickly and efficiently farm things, so obviously we're going to go for the double mobility here. If you want more survivability, you could swap Dash off, but I kind of use Dash defensively as well. Dash is great for the 15% crit damage modifier, but also it's just the best movement in the game. Shadow Step is fantastic because it gives you unstoppable, so you can get out of CC. 50% movement speed after you use it. 8% crit when you use it against that enemy that you stun, and it stuns an enemy, so that is unbelievably good. Shadow Step is fantastic, and it is an incredibly low cooldown as well. Then we're going to be using Shadow Imbuement. For those of you that don't know, we are not playing like a trap build entirely. The reason that we use Shadow Imbuement instead of Poison Trap is because the whole point of this build is to quickly and efficiently farm things and just nuke the entire map. With Poison Trap, this is really good for if you are fighting mobs that are way higher level than you and you need to CC chain them and you just are really scared of taking any amount of damage. Once you have a pretty good build setup, you don't really care about Poison Trap. It falls off because your goal is to just nuke the entire map, right? Poison Trap doesn't help with that. Shadow Imbuement is crazy. You kill one enemy, they explode for 56% weapon damage, but if you kill one enemy, that explosion will cause a chain reaction of explosions, blowing up the entire map. This just gives you so much AoE clear, but it also is a crazy damage effect. And anytime you get that explosion, it's going to make every other enemy vulnerable, so it really helps with our vulnerable application in AoE, but also we have 15% crit chance against enemies when they explode, so it's just fantastic synergy. We get really low cooldown on this. The way that we're taking advantage of Shadow Imbuement the most, and synergizing very well with this, is with Death Trap. You could very easily do this build with Shadow Clone, and again, if you want a Shadow Clone version, I will make that. But Death Trap is fantastic because it just does a crazy amount of damage. The pull-in effect literally sucks enemies in and just deletes them instantly. It is insane. If you're wanting to just quickly farm stuff, Death Trap is crazy. But one of the best synergies about Death Trap is that you can reduce the cooldown incredibly low here. Mine is only 32 seconds, but it's also going to reduce itself by 10 seconds. Sorry, I'm talking a little fast. I'll slow down a little bit. I'm just excited. So it'll reduce the cooldown by 10 seconds if you kill an enemy. Where this gets really good and where the synergy with this build kind of lies is with preparation. Because they nerfed the cooldown reduction on Twisting Blades, it's very difficult to get our cooldowns back just by relying on Twisting Blades. What preparation does is anytime I use my ultimate skill, it's going to reduce all of my other cooldowns instantly. It's going to put them to 0. So not only that though, every 100 energy that I spend is also going to reduce my ultimate skill cooldown, being my Death Trap, by 4 seconds. So the gameplay loop here is pretty much I go in, I pop my Shadow Imbuement early, I get that on my weapons, I pop my Death Trap down, and then boom, I have all of my other skills back and I can use my Shadow Imbuement again. So the goal is to have our Death Trap up 24/7. It's only a 22-second cooldown, but that gets even lower when we use our exposure. But the point is, get the Death Trap cooldown really, really low so we can just spam our Death Trap like crazy, which is going to nuke pretty much everything for us as well. But reducing the cooldown on Death Trap makes it to where we pop our preparation so we have all our other skills back. So we don't have to rely on our Twisting Blades for the cooldown reduction because the nerf hit us really hard there. Exposure is fantastic because it just gives you so much cooldown reduction for the death trap. If you're in like a really big pack and you pop a death trap down, you'll notice that you'll literally get it back instantaneously just because you're using exposure. That is the core premise of the build. I will talk more about how you want to play with it later. Let's get into the skill tree though. One thing I want to mention is that because we're using preparation, we do not have inner sight, so our single target is going to be a little bit weak. So what I do is I literally just open the menu, boom, swap to inner sight. This is not really that annoying at all. You just walk into a boss fight. Usually you have to walk over there and it's very obvious when there's a boss fight. You just boom, inner sight, boom, preparation, okay? The skill tree is on my website, so I'm kind of going to speed run this, but we're going puncture for the vulnerable application, twisting blades to max it out and get the cooldown reduction. If you're noticing that the cooldown reduction isn't helping that much, go for the daze here because that's really good, but the cooldown reduction is still pretty nice. I would still take it. Siphoning strikes and sturdy. Siphoning is our main form of healing and is just really, really good with the build. Shadow step for the crit and the stun. Dash for the crit debuff. I don't take the slow. You could if you wanted, but I don't think it's necessary. Then we have 1 point into concussive and then 1 point into trick attack. We are dazing enemies with one of our legendaries, and a lot of time we'll daze an enemy, and anytime we crit them, we'll instantly knock them down. This counts as another form of CC, and it pretty much just stun locks enemies, which is really funny to see on elites. Weapon mastery is fantastic for extra damage. Exploit and malice is also extra damage. Then we put 1 point into shadow imbuement to get enhanced shadow imbuement and blended for the vulnerable, and then 3 points into consuming shadow after doing 1 point to shadow crash. Consuming shadow paired with death trap is fantastic. It boosts your energy gen like crazy. Every enemy you kill is 30 energy, man. You pop a death trap down, you just killed like 10 guys half the time. So you instantly have crazy energy with this, and because we have our shadow imbuement so often via using preparation and pairing that with death trap, you're going to be killing enemies with shadow damage all the time. This is massive for our energy. And then I have 2 points into precision imbuement. Personally, I have 3 points into frigid finesse because I have the unique boots on. If you do not have the unique boots on, take the points out of finesse and then put them into precision imbuement, and then the other 2 into shadow imbuement to level it up. Then we have 3 points into innervation to give us just extra energy every once in a while, and then 3 points into trap mastery for 12% crit chance anytime we use our death trap. Obviously, we maxed out the death trap here. Mine's only a 32-second cooldown, which you can actually get lower than this, so that's pretty fantastic, and it's basically a 22-second cooldown because Supreme Death Trap lowers it by 10 seconds. Then we have 1 point into Adrenaline Rush and 3 into Haste. This is literally just for the movement speed. If you want more damage, you could take the points out of these and then go into Shadow Imbuement. And we have Exposure. You pretty much need this if you want like reliable, good death trap use. But one thing I want to mention is that Close Quarters Combat is probably the most fun passive skill because it gives you 20% extra attack speed and 20% increased damage against crowd control enemies, which is kind of broken in my opinion. Exposure is just so good because you get the cooldown reduction and you get the stun grenades. But if you feel like you have your death trap often more than enough, I would highly recommend just trying out Close Quarters Combat and seeing if you like it. Now let's get into the legendaries and the best rolls that you want on all of your gear. I will have this posted on the website as well, so make sure to check that out. The most important legendary is obviously the Twisting Blades Orbit, so that it orbits around you. You want to put this on your two-hander weapon so that it has extra effectiveness. As you can see here, every single orbit is going to do 30% damage, and it's damage per hit, so it does like 5 hits on average per orbit, so this is just crazy amounts of damage. Absolutely mandatory. The other mandatory legendary with this build is going to be Umbral. It is incredibly hard to get this, so I feel your pain, guys. This is literally the only 4 roll that I've ever gotten, and it's on a piece of crap Sacred Ring. But pretty much anytime you crowd control an enemy, you get 4 energy. We're going to be CCing enemies constantly through a number of different things. Once you start getting all this CC stuff, this just gives you a ridiculous amount of energy. I tested with and without this, and the second you put this on, it basically feels like you have infinite energy when you're doing large clearing, so definitely be on the lookout for Umbral. One of the mandatory things, I'm not sure if putting it on the necklace is really the best thing, but Disobedience gives you a crazy amount of survivability, and if it's on your necklace, it'll literally armor cap you. So I've just been putting it on my necklace so that we gain even more defensive slots, because I want you guys to feel really, really tanky with this build. You don't need all the tankiness, but the damage with the build is so unbelievably high that you can actually sacrifice some of your damage to get more tankiness. And I think that is just a better play for most people, so they don't have to worry about getting one-shotted all the time. One of the legendaries that we're gaining on the defensive side by putting Disobedience into our neck is going to be Cheats and Might. Might gives you 20% damage reduction anytime you use your basic skill for 6 seconds, which is unbelievably powerful. And Cheats gives you 15% but up to 25% less damage taken, which is different from damage reduction. It's actually better whenever you have an enemy crowd controlled. You're going to permanently have enemies crowd controlled pretty much if you are using the dealing direct damage to a vulnerable enemy has a chance to daze them, paired with the crits on dazed enemies knock them down in the skill tree. To be honest though, Cheats is not nearly as good until you get Penitent Greaves, because this is just going to leave behind a trail of frost that chills enemies perpetually. So every single enemy you're ever going to fight other than bosses is guaranteed crowd controlled pretty much, unless they're far away from you. So you have permanent uptime on cheats, which is just movement speed and less damage taken, which is amazing. Outside of that, getting the Vengeful aspect is just 9% crit all the time, so that's pretty mandatory. I have upward of 300% crit damage, so 9% crit chance is an insane amount of extra damage there. And then I think Accelerating aspect is very good for increasing your attack speed. Currently, Edge Masters is disabled, so I don't have Edge Masters on my build because it is disabled right now, but I am using Conceited aspect, where I deal increased damage when I have a barrier, because I have the barrier unique. If you do not have the barrier unique, you want to use Edge Master's aspect instead of Conceited, and if you do have the barrier unique, I would probably recommend using Edge Masters instead of Accelerating here, or you could opt for removing one of the defensive aspects instead, and then putting the Daze on like your chest or something, and then keeping Accelerating and putting Edge Masters on your gloves, or one of those damage slots. That's all the legendaries that you want to look out for. Now let's talk about stats. So one of my main goals with this build was to reduce the cooldown on our death trap as low as humanly possible. One of the ways that we can do that is with our helmet. You can get up to 14.6% cooldown reduction, which is insane. You can also get 4 ranks of shadow imbuement here, which is fantastic. Otherwise, there's not that much great stuff on the helmet. I got max life and dexterity. I think this is nearly a perfect roll. There's some other stats that you could get here, but looking out for cooldown reduction is the single best thing that's going to help you, because you want your death trap to be as low as possible, and it's just nice having like a 7-second shadow step. On the chest, you can get some really good defensive stuff here. You want at least damage reduction and damage reduction from close. The extra damage you're going to get is not as relevant as just having extra survivability. Like 12% cutthroat skill damage isn't that great, and then I also have 10% armor, which is amazing. The gloves have some really crazy stats. Ideally, you want attack speed, critical strike chance, ranks of twisting blades, and trap skill cooldown. So my gloves are perfect, other than the fact that I am missing attack speed. However, the chance of slow is actually pretty good because we have a lot of synergy with crowd controlling enemies, especially with Umbral here. I would not equip a new pair of gloves unless it at the minimum had crit chance and ranks of twisting blades. Getting gloves is really hard, but the trap skill cooldown reduction is crazy good too. Gloves are probably one of the best slots. For my pants, I'm using Temerity. This is just because it gives me pretty much permanent uptime on barrier, and I think that that's really good offensively because I get Conceited aspect, which is just 23% multiplicative damage when I have a barrier up. If I were to not have these pants, I'd go for pants that give me damage reduction while injured, or just straight up damage reduction. That's really good, or damage reduction from close enemies. There's not really anything else on the pants that is that great. On my boots, I'm using the Penitent Greaves for the guaranteed chill application. Otherwise, I would be using boots that had movement speed and energy cost reduction on them, and also I'd be using the double shadow step legendary. That is insane. It's very difficult to get these boots, but once you get them, the amount of damage that it provides you is simply unmatched, not only with the 10% here, but the 15% in the skill tree and also in the Paragon Board. For your range weapon, you want to use a crossbow because it always is going to roll with vulnerable damage, and you want a double vulnerable damage roll, and then next to that you want dexterity, and then after that you want critical strike damage, and then core skill damage. Mine is pretty much perfect. You could set the core skill damage for damage to close enemies, but you definitely want to make sure to at the very least get vulnerable damage and dexterity, and then the crit damage is obviously very good. Similar story with your one-handers. You want to be using swords because swords always drop with inherent critical strike damage, which is pretty much the best. But also with weapon mastery here, you're going to probably have a weapon mastery neck. Most people will, and this just gives you 9% increased damage. But if you have a weapon mastery neck, that's 18% multiplicative increased damage per sword that you have. That is crazy good. For the sword rolls, this one right here is perfect pretty much. Crit damage, dexterity, vulnerable damage, core skill damage, damage to close. Actually you want double crit damage, so crit damage twice, vulnerable damage, dexterity, and then probably damage to close or core skill damage is what you're looking out for. On the rings here, this ring is terrible. This one's quite good. You want crit chance, crit damage, and vulnerable damage because these are the best stats again. And then for the fourth roll, shadow damage is okay because it works for death trap and our shadow imbuement, but you'd probably rather have, I think you can get damage to close or damage to like crowd control. That's probably your best bet. The amulet has a crazy amount of rolls on it. The main thing that you can get on your amulet is cooldown reduction and trap skill cooldown reduction. I am missing like 15% cooldown reduction because you could have trap skill as well as normal, which means your death trap could literally, I did the math, if you have like maximum cooldown reduction, I think your death trap could be like, I think it was like a 17-second cooldown or something. It's pretty insane. You can get it to where you can just spam your death trap if I were to have a better necklace here, but this is the best one that I got. And then you want it to have +3 ranks to either Frigid Finesse or Weapon Mastery. Frigid Finesse is if you're using Penitent Greaves, and Weapon Mastery is just straight up extra damage, so that's what you want to be looking out for. You can also get damage reduction from close enemies, which is fantastic for survivability, and you can also get percentage dexterity, which is very good too. The Amulet has a crazy amount of good rolls, and it is probably the item that I've saved up the most of, and it is difficult to find exactly what I want on it. When it comes to your gems, you want to put topazes in all of your normal armor, and then emeralds in your weapons for the crit damage, and then skulls in your jewelry for the straight up armor. When it comes to the Paragon board, I'm just going to briefly go over things. If anything does end up changing about it, which is very likely, I will update it on my website, so make sure if you want to copy the Paragon board, you're using the link from the website. This could probably be improved upon a little bit. I think it's pretty good, but I may end up improving upon it in the future. For the first board, I'm immediately going for Closer, pretty much just using this for the damage reduction here. The extra damage is nice, but the 10% reduced damage while wielding a melee weapon is fantastic. For the second board, I went the Trapper board with Deadly Ambush so that we deal 23% multiplicative damage to enemies affected by our traps. Really just going to be buffing our Death Trap here. And then you also get the Trap skill cooldown reduction at the bottom here, which is pretty much mandatory for me because I want to spam the Death Trap as much as possible. Let me put in the Ambush glyph. The stats from this aren't great. It's just 10% multiplicative damage against enemies affected by a trap. If you are not level 100, do not do the Trapper board first. You want to do the No Witness board first so that you can slot in Exploit. We'll talk about Exploit later, but if you're lower level, Exploit is the glyph that you want to unlock literally as soon as humanly possible because it is the best glyph. Moving on to the next board, I went Cheap Shot. This is just a crazy amount of extra damage and synergizes incredibly well with Penitent Greaves. And then we have probably the best glyph outside of Exploit, which is Combat. For every 5 intel, you get 7.5% crit damage increase with your core skill, and you also get a lot of energy refund, so we pretty much maxed out all of the intelligence possible here. This board is also crazy because you get a ton of damage to crowd controlled. It's like well over 100% here. You have 77730, 77730, 77730, and crit damage. It's unbelievable how much damage you can get from this board. For the next board, we aren't going for the legendary node here because it's pretty bad. We're pretty much using this board so that we can get some damage to close, and we can also get some critical strike damage here. And the glyph I went for here is Turf. The damage to close enemies is actually pretty good here, but I'm mainly doing it for the damage reduction from close enemies, which I find pretty nice. I could maybe put one more point into strength to buff the damage to close, but isn't that big of a deal. And then the next board, I went a No Witness board because this is just 30% increased damage for our Death Trap, which is insane. 10% increased damage that we're going to have up all the time because it's 20 seconds, and our Death Trap cooldown is literally lower than 20 seconds. We go Exploit, which is guaranteed vulnerable application anytime you just hit any enemy, and I got as much strength as possible to buff the vulnerable damage here, which is just really good. Some of these nodes on this board aren't great. Like this one I like for the crit damage, but damage to healthy is kind of weak. These are probably the only good nodes, but No Witness is just so powerful that I figured I may as well. That's pretty much it for the board. Feel free to experiment with stuff, and again, it will be on the website, and I will be updating it if anything changes. The main takeaway is if you are not level 100, do the Trapper board last, okay? Just put the Trapper board here and do the No Witness board first. The reason that we do the No Witness board last and the Trapper board first is because otherwise you would not have enough points in intelligence to unlock the skill cooldown reduction here. But if you do it like this, then you do have enough points. All right, let's get into some gameplay. I'm going to go over some tips and tricks for you guys in terms of how you actually want to play the build. The biggest mistake I see people making, and that is going to get you killed all the time, is shadow stepping into packs. You don't want to shadow step in because that means you're not going to have all of your stuff stacked up, your disobedience, your aspect of might, but also you're losing your unstoppable. So if you shadow step in, instantly get CC'd, you don't have a way to get out of it. Usually you kind of want to, throw a basic attack, kind of stack up your disobedience a little bit, group everything up. You want to pop a shadow imbuement to have it preempted, and then you want to death trap everything in, and then by death trapping, you get your shadow imbuement back. And that's pretty much how you want to play with the build. Rogue relies on its mobility a lot for the survivability, but if we're doing dungeons that aren't like, way higher than us, it should be pretty easy most of the time. Got a nice little pull here. See the death trap action. Ooh, the big bust. Ooh, the big bust. So yeah, you can see it's just really good for just nuking everything. Obviously, this isn't like a crazy high nightmare dungeon or anything, but that's not what this build is meant for. The majority of people aren't going to do high nightmare dungeons, right? So I'm not going to suggest a build that the majority of people really don't care about. This build is for if you're getting from, 50 to 100 and you want to be able to blast. And this is the perfect build for blasting. Obviously, I'm doing stuff that is higher level than me. I've done, tier 70 or whatever. You can do higher stuff. It is just not the best for that because the survivability is a little bit lacking. Shadow Imbuement kind of falls off if there's like a ton of mobs that are incredibly tanky. It's very hard to take advantage of it. But Shadow Imbuement is the best skill in the game if there's mobs that don't have a ton of HP that you're going to instantly nuke, which I'm doing here even with enemies higher level than me. They literally get deleted. I guess I have a shrine on right now, right? But See if I can group up the mobs a little bit better. I'm trying to get a better group. Man, I should not have been trying to do the objective, dude. Jesus. Honestly, they should change the objective sometime, because doing this and getting hit out of it is one of the most annoying things that I've ever experienced in any video game. And I pretty much just died to it because I was just trying to greet it, because I didn't want to pop a death trap on like 2 mobs, you know what I mean? A lot of the time I like to skip past them. Obviously don't do it if there's too many of them for you, but I like to skip past them, guys, and kind of group them up, because the more mobs the better. Just take advantage of death trap a little bit better that way, but also you get more cooldown reduction if there's more mobs. So typically I kind of like to group them up and then nuke them down. I think that's a really good strategy. So again, you want to pop your Shadow Amulet and then boom, death trap, because it's going to reduce the cooldown and everything. And the gameplay is just really clean. Having such a low cooldown on your Shadow Trap, or your death trap rather, is just really nice for preparation. Just having it up all the time. Pop down the death trap, boom, everything kind of just dies. The suck in is really nice too, and as you can see, that guy got dazed, knockdown, dazed, knockdown, dazed, knockdown, which is pretty much our only CC with this build for like hard CC wise, and that's how we're able to kind of stay alive a little bit. Poison Trap is better obviously for hard CC, but the problem with Poison Trap is you can't quickly clear all that well, because you know, you want to group up the mobs and nuke them, and a lot of the time the mobs run out of the Poison Trap. The Poison Trap radius is just absolutely tiny, which I'm not a huge fan of. This is a really good moment for Death Trap here, so we pop it down, everything gets sucked in, get our Shadow Movement back. I mean, dude, look how nice that is. And my Death Trap is already back, ready for the next room. It's really, really good if you're farming something like Champion's Demise. Like, I use this all the way up, and I probably put some Champion's Demise gameplay at the beginning of the video. Like, that just feels insanely good when there's a massive amount of mobs. This dungeon used to have way more mobs. I was hoping it would be a little bit more dense, but not too dense here. But it's still a really quick dungeon, so I figure I may as well upload this one. I didn't have a ton of mobs there, so my cooldown reduction on my death trap, my death trap isn't up yet, but I just got it back, so I'm gonna have it for the next pack. Hopefully, yeah, we can get a bunch of dudes. Get a bunch of dudes, suck them all in, blow them up with the Shadow Movement. Oh, dude, it feels so good. And it feels so good. Last Wave Shrine is kind of carrying right there. Wow, they really nerfed the density in this dungeon, huh? It's kind of not anywhere near what it used to be. I was hoping for a little bit more density, but whatever. You guys, I just wanted to give a quick showcase of the build, but the gameplay at the beginning should be more than suffice. But right here, I'm gonna swap to a boss fight, and I'm just gonna swap to Inner Sight. Boom. It's just really easy. Get the infinite energy there. The bossing isn't great because we aren't really focused on bossing, but as you can see, I still kind of melt these guys, and it's perfectly fine. One thing on bossing is that your vulnerable application is only going to be through if you get like Shadow Movement explosions and through puncture. So every once in a while, you need to throw out a puncture because we're not using the blast trappers. But yeah, that's pretty much going to be it for the video. If you guys enjoyed, please make sure to drop a like, subscribe for videos similar to this one, and I will see you later.